Today, we have a Way-Seeking Mind Talk by Sarah Webb. Sarah and I have been doing Zen writing for about 15 years, and I consider her a dear friend and a wonderful poet and a longtime Zen student who has dedicated her life to exploring the intersection of language, spirituality, and practice. A former public school teacher and English professor in Oklahoma, Sarah has been fascinated by how words can either trap the mind or point themselves to deeper truths. Her spiritual journey began in childhood solitude in nature and led her to decades of Zen study, primarily with the teacher in Montreal, Albert Lowe. Sarah has published poetry and essays in numerous Zen journals and literary publications. Her poetry collections include Black, which explores the sacred through symbols of darkness and desert, and Red Riding Hood's Sister, which uses poetry as a healing process to address domestic abuse. Throughout her practice, writing and time in the natural world have served as pillars of her spiritual exploration, alongside the complexities of life as a single parent and teacher. Now in her later years, she continues to find Zen as her guiding path through the challenges of aging and morality. So Sarah, you're up. A little bit muted though.
One moment, Sarah. Can you unmute now? No, hold on. Are you getting a pop-up on your screen? There you go.
I got it. Can you
Thank
hear
you.
me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm Sarah Webb, and here to talk about a practice that's been pretty much lifelong. And I'm getting pretty old, so here's what you might look forward to. Well, everybody's different. I thought I'd talk about the religious background I came from and my family first. And one thing that came to mind was a conversation that my mother had with my sister and my brother and me. And she asked us if we had been born anywhere in the world, what religion would we be? And what came to my mind immediately was animist. And I was just a kid, and I thought, animist? That's what people in the jungle think. Well, I was only 13 or something. And so I didn't say that. I mean, I picked one of the major religions. I don't even remember what it was. It wasn't Christian. Um, and that was a Methodist family. They were teetotaling, but they weren't fundamentalists. They were pretty open-minded. My parents were teachers, a high school principal. We were all real smart. We all talked about a lot of stuff. It was the 1950s. Things were pretty conventional. So why did I come up with animist? And I think it was because I was an odd little kid, and I was really solitary. And I used to go across the highway and follow the creek way out in the country and walk in the fields. I wasn't supposed to. I was hiding the fact that I was doing this. It was fine if I did it with other kids, but my parents were concerned that that was not not very safe. And there was a lot of time just, being aware of what was there and watching the water and watching the grass. But there was an experience, and I consider it my first taste, and was sitting under some trees and looking up into the light coming through the leaves, and everything just seemed to get real vivid. And I wouldn't even think that much about it, except that afterwards, every little plant seemed like a person. And I would walk and like, oh, here's this little person plant, here's this little person. I was about 11 or 12. Um, and I kind of tried to extend it. And so, like, when I'd be riding my bike to school, there was a little place where there was some woods. And I would just I would leave early and I'd pull in there, spend about 10 minutes just listening to the wind in the trees. Um, and eventually, that faded. But I was continually going out into the woods. And I think that's why I said animus, like the little plants, you know? Um, and then, I did the usual things of growing up. Um, and I had a little prayer practice where I would lie in bed at night and I would lie real still and put my hands outside the covers and and repeat some of the psalms. Yeah, there's a walk through the valley of death, that kind of thing. And and I began to write poems in uh in junior high. Um, but I recently came across a quote from a poet and writer, a Kiowa poet named Scott Momaday. And he said, "What was the day in your life that mattered most?" And I'm gonna read some poems as part of this. And this is the first one, the day. The day was a tracing of leaves in their first green, their gloss, willing to cast themselves out and be caught by sun and air. I sat beneath them in a rising of twigs and green, slender leaves drawn by the sun, all of us young, all of us saying yes. The leaves, the child, the slim trunks, and the light that held us. The air that said, "Come then, since you're willing. Here's the door, open, open in you." And all of us entered together, leaves, child, the young trees. So we began our lives in the silt of a floodplain, in the glint of sun and water. That moment with the wind still and only ourselves, slow in the light. So as I began to write poetry, I was found it odd that I would start to write, and maybe it would be an hour later or longer, and it would just seem like I had sat down. And I was like, why? And there would be like a taste in my mouth. And I was like, that's not the way I usually am. And so I was very curious about that and started, to look at that. And along about that time, I had a dream, it was a repeated dream of ocean waves. And on the, I was a young shell collector too, from when we went to the beach, when we went to California to the beach and stuff. But at any rate, the dream was here were the ocean waves. Beautiful shells were falling out of the waves and there in the surf, and I would pick them up. And that's what it felt like when I was writing poetry. It wasn't like I'm planning to do this, I'm choosing these words. It was just like, here are these beautiful things that are coming. Um, and so I wrote poetry for a long time. And later, when I was in my 20s, I kind of created a master's program that cobbled together when they didn't have these MFA programs, or at least there wasn't one where I was. And and took some formal classes in poetry. And after that, I didn't write much poetry. uh, but and so that died down. Um, so that's a poetry theme that comes through my life. And later there's a change. So I grew up and I was a teenager and I fell in love with a very troubled boy. And my parents pretty much said, you have to choose between him and us. And I chose him. And we eloped and we went after my freshman year in college and lived in Chicago. And we sent each other to college. I sent him, but he sent me first, and then I sent him, like, working while the other one went to school. Um, when we were sending him to college, we moved to the West Coast. So but we were at the West Coast in the 60s in Eugene, Oregon, and later in Portland, Oregon. And we were like hippie adjacent. I was teaching as in the public schools and he was going to school and but there was a lot that happened. It was very 60-ish and and I went back that's when I went back and got that master's in English too. Um and a lot of good things I think happened, but it was pretty wild. And our marriage was fragmenting under Treatum, really. Um, and it became psychologically abusive. There were hints. Later, it was violent, but at that point, it was just like hints of it. Like he put his hands around my throat. He didn't do anything more. Um, so that was the situation. It was a stew of my own problems, the culture around me, an inner thing that said, "Okay, I need something," and some experiences as a child that and through poetry that were pointing me in a certain direction. And but at the time, my relationship was the biggest thing in my mind. Um, looking back, I think partly because I had chosen him and left for him, and I had this image of true love and all of that. I was like, "We will make this work." Uh, and he was pretty much the meaning of my life at that point. So I have a poem about that, and it says, "Monks to a younger self. Once monks would flog themselves, wear crowns of thorns, fast, and face the night alone. Perhaps you're one of these. Return. Nothing saying that a lie, but that you will do anything to join with your beloved. For Christ, they cut their arms, let blood run, and turned away from all that pleases. And so have you. Perhaps in the coldest Spanish churches, God came and filled their hearts with fire. There they found all they sought and were complete. And you? What can what you seek be found in a man in a body of clay? Or do you, like a wrong-headed old monk, look outside for the light, blind to the flame within? Enough. You will do as you do. They lived too harshly, those old monks, tried to force the door. They lived long enough to find a different way, and so shall you. So I think because what I was doing was not working, I looked out for something else, and I began a practice. This um, that was about in the 1970, 1971, and I was I really wanted to learn to meditate. And I went shopping for a discipline. I would like read about different ones and visit and talk to people who were in it. And I looked at the Catholics and the Quakers and the Christian charismatic. Good thing I didn't choose that one. That would have been a real mismatch. But it had the charismatic part. Tibetan Buddhism, Zen. And the first thing I did was the Divine Light Mission. And I learned from them how to meditate. But they had a thing, I mean, they were almost a cult, and maybe they were. Uh, and they had this 9-year-old at the time who they said was God. He was an avatar of God. And so for probably less than a year, we went to their meetings and their talks, and uh, and his name was Maharashi Ji, I believe. And we personally and our friends called him the kid. And my husband at first finally said, he's not God. And I was like, oh, yes, he is. And then later I was like, well, maybe not. And uh, so we did that for a while. And then I was like, okay, well, I got to keep looking. And I was reading a book by D.T. Suzuki. It's not Shinru Suzuki, but another teacher. He wasn't a teacher in the sense of having a following. He was more an academic, but he talked about a lot of concepts in Zen. And he had a story in it. And a teacher and a student are walking in the woods by a stream, and the student says, "What is the way?" And the teacher says, "Listen to the stream." Well, I mean, I'd certainly done a lot of walking by streams. And I thought, there you go, there you go, this will be the one. And of course, I mean, he wasn't talking about walking by streams, but it was at least a signal to me that it might be something that could relate to my earlier proclivities, my earlier experiences. And so I picked it in, and I started going to a little Zen group that met at a Quaker meeting house. And here's a poem about the first things that I felt when I was sitting and meditating with the Zen group. In the body of the world. Oh, and some of these poems come from a book I wrote in which a lot of the poems are about she, because I didn't really identify with that early self until the very end of the book. So, in the body of the world. She is not sure what to call it. Tasting? There is a taste to things. The jar of the shovel into compacted compost. The softness of the rag on the jade plant, following the curve of each fat lobe, spark of dust into the air. She remembers from her childhood when she stood to feel the sunshine, a lift of grass in the wind. She goes with a friend to a white-painted church, sits at a wall in the plain room, waver of wood grain under the white. The hands ready to fly up, settle. When she wakes, quiet in the morning, an edge of dream, a bird on a sill, mountains, green waves of mountains. The thing that I was doing was, there was a teacher on the West Coast called G.U. Kennett, and it was Shasta Abbey. And she was actually very much a teacher of a monastic teacher. And the Portland Zen Center was kind of her stepchild. And a priest from the Abbey would come. She wouldn't come. Finally, she came a couple of times. So there really wasn't a teacher in residence. And I was still in a very, very difficult situation in my marriage. Uh, and, I got acquainted with the idea of precepts, and you could live your life in a way that was calm and structured, and it worked. And I was like, not sure I'm up to that. uh, but finally I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to talk with my husband and we're gonna have to change some things and I'm gonna have to make some confessions and he and both and I are gonna need to change some things. And there's a saying, it says, when you're walking down the wrong road and you turn around, you have to eat a lot of dust. And what happened when I did that was that my marriage became violent and uh, quite violent. Um, and we talk about clinging. Well, I was certainly clinging to that relationship. Um, and I also felt, hey, I have a great part in the messed up relationship and take some responsibility and let's turn this thing around. And I think I made a very tactical mistake. It was like I think I remember telling myself, I'll give it 3 years. I'll give it 3 years, and if I can't turn it around by then, I'll go. But by the end of 3 years, I was not in shape to go. It was very psychologically damaging. It had been so before, but it got real bad. So, anyway, I'm not proud of it, but eventually I left by falling in love with somebody else and leaving. I think that was my only way I could leave. But anyway, um, Zen in that was mostly a help. I mean, it clarified me. It it gave me something deeper to identify with instead of a relationship. Um, but it also there were ways that I interpreted Zen that were not useful, which is, let's accept the way things are. Yeah, yeah, this is hurts, this is bad, but it is what it is, so accept it, as opposed to protect yourself and get out. Um, both the meditation and the writing, which I was continuing to do at that time, uh, I wasn't doing as much writing, but it was mostly prose. Um, but they clarified. Uh, and in the sense, Zen was a refuge for me. In the sense of here was a place that was sane, it was energized, it was calming, and that had deeper roots. And when I did leave, Zen was highly helpful in healing. When I left, I got pregnant. I mean, the marriage, I mean, took almost a year for the divorce to be final, and I got pregnant in that time. Um, and so then I was a single parent, and that actually was, that was hard. Uh, but it was really lovely too, because here was someone to love that was not damaging. And so I think in a way my daughter and I kind of grew up together. I was healing growing up, doing some growing up I never did because it stalled in the marriage, and she was growing up as a child. Uh and uh a poem I have about that is turning to the ordinary. Eggs at breakfast, toast. She must have eaten them, but she hadn't noticed. Not any more than she had felt the towel she folded. It was the shouting that mattered, the knock at the door at the wrong time of night. And after she left the dramatic and the melodramatic behind with the record collection and her cousin, her husband, she fumbled for it a while, remembering scenes, indulging in new ones, hitting the high notes. But drama faded, and there was just 6 a.m., getting up to go to work, changing the baby, making supper, cheese sandwiches and canned soup, too tired to do more than that. You can cultivate a taste for the boring, what she would have called boring, but now was just life. Reading the newspaper, pushing the baby in a stroller in the park, sitting on the sofa, brushing her baby's hair, soft brush and a soft stroke, sunlight on the cushion, apple juice in a cup. So I went back to school. I decided I would move back near my parents and repair that relationship and go to school and get a degree, um, a graduate degree. And I did it in teaching ESL, and I went into an area which was psycholinguistics. Um, and my dissertation went far away from ESL. By the time I finished that, I was like, this is not about ESL. I mean, English is the second language. It was about metaphor and how it can lead to insight. Um, sometimes sometimes in an ESL setting, but mostly just in general, how writing can create healing and insight. Um, so I was working on that and living in Austin, and I met my teacher, the one man who became my teacher, Albert Lowe. He had come, his son lived in Austin, and he gave a talk at the Austin Zen Center, and there was a little tiny group with his son and a good friend, someone who became a lifelong spiritual friend, Carrie Tucker, and her husband, and there were about, it varied at times, but for a while, for a few years, it kept going, and it had about 6 to 8 people in it. And when I was going to be graduating and moving out, I didn't know where. Albert had to talk to me about various teachers that would be good for me, that would be a match for the kind of practice I seemed to be creating. And he said, or you can stay with me, but I'll be in Montreal because we're not continuing here in Austin. And I thought, well, Austin, Montreal, and I got a little kid. But one of the little, we called them sashins, but intensives, this is the word you use at Appamata. Something occurred which made me say, no, this is a teacher for me. And what happened was, it was actually a mistake. And we would be sitting upstairs in a remodeled attic, and the stairs were really, really steep. And I had gone down to check on the soup, and I was climbing the stairs back. And as my head reached the level of the room, there was Albert sitting, and I could see his face. And I looked down because you're not supposed to be looking at people when they're sitting. And but I'd already seen his face. And what I saw just went like, whoa. Uh it, it yes, it was absorption, and it was positive, but it was like he was just like transfigured. It was just like this. I mean, I can't even describe it. It was just like, it was kind of like love or energy or talking to God or I don't know what, but it was something. And and I thought to myself, there's a fire at the heart of Zen. It's not just some intellectual thing. It's not something to just calm you down. It's something to give you steadiness, but there's a real fire. And I never lost that feeling that that was true for Zen and it was true for him. And I saw it in a different way when he was quite old and he was in a lot of pain, and he was walking to the altar, and we were sitting, we were waiting, our eyes were down, and his feet went by, and I could see how painful each step was, but he was doing it. And his son used to say, Albert will die teaching. And essentially that was true. I mean, when he had to quit teaching because of sickness, or strong sickness, he died within weeks. Um, but it was just like that energy was taking him forward. It was irrelevant. He was going to do the thing. But at any rate, I always had great respect for him. And he was just, if you just met him, he was just a stuffy little Englishman, kind of formal. He was Canadian at that point, but you could see his background. Um, so one other thing I wanted to say about that, when he was sitting, there were some words that I could put to it. The closest I can come is there's a song that says "Heart of My Heart," and I just felt like that was there for him, and that was there in Zen, and that is what I experienced. So for me, Zen is very emotional. There's a lot of love in it. There's a lot of energy in it. And it is not for me just a psychological process or an intellectual process. Um, the training that we had up there, we'd go up a couple of times a year. That's all I could do. I had a lot of pain when I was sitting, and my doctor was like, "Okay, you can have steroids, that's it. But I'm only going to do that for you twice a year because we don't want too much of that. It's too bad for your body." So I would go up, and in the early years, it would be 7 days of sitting, and we would start like 4:30 in the morning. There would be some breaks. There would be some work breaks. There'd be some lunch breaks. But we pretty much 4:30 in the morning, 9 at night, and all week would be in silence, except for when he spoke or when we had Dr. San. And so a lot of energy arose. Uh, and they talk about Makio. Certainly were visionary things, but mostly that's the mind doing its thing. But there were times I was like, "What is that?" And we would talk about it. I mean, just a few times. Um, it was the usuals in, and I mean the universals in, and uh, going beyond good and bad, uh, setting intention, um, form, emptiness is being underneath things. I remember in the chants really acting very strongly to form is only emptiness, emptiness is only form. Um, and and the right and one of the things that happened. Oh, and he had advised me to study the mystics. So I'd read St. John of the Cross and the Sufis and Eckhart and stuff like that. And then but it was a lay practice. It was very much, you embody it in your life. Um, and he did, I think it was a kind of in a way, an old-fashioned practice, not real institutional. Um, and there was a lot of room for growth for the women in the Sangha. Um, but some, you hear about the old masters beating you with a stick. Well, occasionally we could get like that. I mean, not physically, but you didn't know what would happen when you went in. He might be, "Oh yeah, that's great, great," and he might say, "Hmm." So, at any rate, uh, any rate, and one of the things that's different than some modern things is that we were very much a wisdom practice. And he said, compassion is just a natural outgrowth of understanding how you are one with everyone and with everything. If you're one thing, why do you want to hurt them? Why do you want to see them suffer? At any rate, we did use koans. I was never very good at that. I remember working with Say or Soul. Uh, and he advised me to go back into poetry. He said, "You come in and Dakasan and you start talking like a poem." He says, "Do you write poetry?" And I said, "Well, I do." And he said, "Well, I think you should try it again." So I did. I remember at one point he asked me, because I really got into all the words, he said, wanted me to come back and demonstrate to him a poem without words, which I did. And I didn't think I could. And but it was very much like writing a poem where you say, okay, here's it starting, here's it going. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm going. Bam, it happened. And that's what happened with him. I had some things, like I rolled a plate and I filled a glass of water and I was like totally dead. And then my hand just went boop and threw the plate up in the air. No planning. And that's like a poem is. It just comes. You may set an intention, you may be thinking on a topic, but it comes to you and it comes from you don't know where. Uh, so so I have, of course, things change and he passed away, and has been. It's not like I'm sitting around grieving. It's just been hard to move on. Um, but I think the ways that I've moved on the most has been in poetry. I have certainly sat at places, and I'm most connected to Appamata, uh, but the poetry has been the thing, and justice has been a real vehicle for that. Uh, because here's a group of people, and we're all exploring, and we're letting words do it, and then we're also sharing with each other. So there's that sangha. Uh, and that was one thing that was missing with my experience with Albert, because I'm in Texas, and there was my friend Carrie who would also go back and forth, but not as much as I was doing, at least toward the end. And even when you're talking ahead of time, I mean, the session hadn't started. It's the night after. Half of them are speaking in French, you know. So there was not much sense of sangha. We came for those sessions, and it was very strong, and there was a very group energy, but it was nonverbal. But at any rate, but in just this, we write and we read and we have little small groups and talk to each other, and it has a real group feeling. And we've tried to set it up, and these are some things I've seen in my own writing, that we're letting whatever arises arise. And we're not judging. We're not saying, oh, our writing's good or bad. And we're saying that this world of form is sacred too. It has its roots in emptiness. It has its roots in the sacred. Um, so whatever you write about, that's fine. It's more letting it arise. Um, there's some looking into stuck places. We don't make a point of that there, but sometimes the prompts take people there. I've written certainly in my own writing, trying to heal by looking into where things are still stuck and where things are still painful. But also I've used the writing as a tool to look into. That's how I'm still exploring, and also try to write, because poetry has that capability a lot more than most things. Try to look into the inexpressible by going sideways, slantways. You're maybe talking about a berry bush, but it's standing in for something else. Um,
Sarah,
about time
Sarah, you have 7 minutes left. And
7? Okay, good.
there's
All
one
right.
thing that you didn't talk about yet.
Well, I didn't talk about aging, and
No, no, not, well, two things, but one thing is your pilgrimages.
oh yeah. Well, one of the things I would do, as an I would go on what I call, I mean, I thought of them as pilgrimages and I set them up as pilgrimages and what they were. And I had this VW van we got, and I would travel across the country alone. And I had read this, I had listened to this tape by Sylvia Boorstein, which is called Road Sage. And she's talking about how to travel and drive and stuff in a way that you are using it in a mindful way. And I set it up. I would take maybe a month out there, stay with some friends, come back, maybe take, you know. So sometimes it was the whole trip was like 2 months, but the friend part was just the friend part. Uh, but really sometimes I'd be out in the wilderness, not the wilderness really, but natural stuff. Uh, a month, 6 weeks, um, altogether. And I wouldn't listen to the radio, and sometimes at night I did get tired and I'd read, and I would write, and I would draw, and I would try to be slow and be aware of things. I used it as a way to practice. Uh, that's me, but Kim says I have a few more minutes than that. So I that was a really good thing to do, and I can't do that now. I mean, I'm not safe driving out alone across the country anymore at 81. Um, and, uh, and you ever it seems like I rem every time I turn around, so and so has died, so and so has died. Several people in the book club are died. Poets I know have died, relatives have died, and I'm like, "And who's next? And, when am I next?" And, and healing and sickness things too. I remember a conversation I had with my teacher early on. I'd missed one of our little Austin sessions because I had a cancer operation, and I said, it felt like a session, and he was like, "Yeah, sessions can be kind of like that, can't they?" And well, painful struggle, gotta going on through, there so there are that is I mean, certainly in my earlier in my life, I had a great deal of trouble with clinging, but now I have to say, the things go, you know, your body goes, your experiences go, your friends go, and I think about, parting from my daughter. That will be the hardest. That's the hardest aspect of it. At any rate, and if I have time, how many minutes? 3?
Four,
What?
four.
4, okay. I'm gonna read a poem that is kind of where I am now, and it looks back over the practice, and it's called In Secret. I love you as certain dark things are to be loved, in secret. That's a quote from Pablo Neruda. One night I put God away, packed him, her perhaps it was, away like an old toy, a childhood journal. Not the right path, I said. And it was true, is true, that God is too small, a cutout painted, the edges jagged from scissors that tore the cardboard. But I packed something else away that night, a love, some slant of light on the sparrow at the bench from a face on the street. Not entirely gone, some scrap of song, a darkness in the wind, coming roundabout, not at the front door, but a leak through the sash in the window, the longer nameable. Maybe this had to be to stop pitting and naming and being good, to stop doing the work and let the work lead on its way. But oh, I've lost the honey green of leaves in childhood, a light like milk falling from a basement window. Throw it on the fire, my teacher said. If it's true, it will not burn. And I, childlike, threw it in. God and all the sacraments, the voice that whispered to me, the desire for light and sweetness falling from the air. And so a long, slow burning, a prayer like a coal in the mind. So many years, all the world burning, and I do not know where I stand in the land sacred despite me. Me still wanting to love, but what? A glow in the night sky? Me still wanting to throw it all on the fire. Myself, God, Zen, the boxes and doors and names. Still wanting to stand in the rain and be nothing but rain. Still hearing a sound, tink, tink, bird call, whistle tone, voice asking, do you love me? And my child voice answering, yes, yes, I love you. If you tell me to, I will do it again. And that's it. And if you have questions, now's the time for questions, because we kept it short enough that there can be questions.
Actually interested.
Speak out loud.
I'm actually interested in hearing you speak more about metaphor and your practice.
Okay. One of the things that came out is a word has boundaries, and we one of the theories of language is that words take a little area and they say this much and not these other things. And so you're kind of like taking reality and it's like chair, floor, Kim, cushion, Zindo, um, little bits, and it freezes things. Metaphor can say Zindo is like a breeze that blows through, or is a breeze that blows through. There's not really truly too much difference between simile and metaphor. Or people talk about light as energy, or a dark sun radiating as being a different kind of energy. So a lot of our language is frozen metaphors that were alive and working in us, and then they get frozen. So like a muscle is actually a word that's based on mouse, like a little mouse jumping when you move the muscle. Well, it froze. So we have a lot of frozen words. But we also have living metaphor. And in Zen, they talk about live words and dead words. And well, I don't know if they say dead words, but they say live words. And live words like point you past themselves. So metaphor does that too. So if a metaphor is fresh enough, I mean, we may say man is a wolf. And it's just, if you've heard it too often, it's not very fresh. But if it's fresh, you're like, oh, how is it a wolf? And am I wolfish? And I want to bite. So that's part of it. And then the other thing is that these new formulations in metaphor can lead to insight. And they give us a different model for looking at things, but also They come from a deeper place inside, and they can say a little truth in the metaphor that wasn't there before. So if I say the relationship is scalding, well, what did it mean? It meant it was damaging, but it was hot. It was a lot of different things, you know. Um, there's a whole lot of things you could say about metaphor, but it opens up language, and that is one reason why poetry can say things that aren't so rigidly categorized. It can lead us into a new place. And if you're also open into an aspect of mind that is rooted in, that is fluid and just receiving, it can use that metaphor to say something to you or to bring something into being. And so, and I have a metaphor. One of the things my teacher said to me, he says, one reason why poetry is working for you is because the gate for you into Zen is dynamic unity. And unity in that everything is one thing, everything's flowing together and not frozen into these discrete parts. But that feeling of unity, but it's dynamic. And poetry is dynamic. It lets that energy go flowing up. And I feel through, and I see it every time I write a poem. It's like things are coming into being. I don't know where they came from. I didn't make them. At the most, I set an intention. Sometimes it's just, okay, let's write something. And things appear, grow out of nothing. But you see it elsewhere too. I mean, a child or even your own life, or just even a chair. Here's this chair. We've named it a chair, but it's wiggling around, and and we're keeping it there with the word.
Sarah, forgive the interruption. We have a question
Yeah.
online.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear the question online.
Oh, okay. So Sarah, I
Yeah.
am so thankful that you approached the whole subject of metaphor, because as soon as you started talking about it, I felt vulnerable and teary.
Oh.
And the reason is that what your teacher said to me, to you, is so true for me, that it's a gateway for you. And I'm a person who has some processing issues that cause, and some issues of fragmentation that cause it very difficult for me to simply think in a very intellectual, linear manner. But I can almost understand almost anything. I can't always share it. But the way I absorb things and what brings me joy comes through poetry and metaphor. And without that, without the years of poetry and metaphor, you know, at Appamada, I could not, that is when practice is fully embodied for me. Lant and Peg over the years, and now our other teachers, you know, they have generously used poems. And those poems stick with me. Not only the poems, but sometimes a simple phrase that comes out of the poems that sticks with me. And that's where, wow, that is where I'm able to experience the joy of life. But it especially happens in Sangha. It especially happens when I'm hearing or discussing with others. So I'm so grateful for you discussing this. I would love to know, you know, more of recommendations for pursuing language, the relationship between language, spirituality, and Zen. I mean, it's like, I'd love to hear more about that because that's the space I live in. So thank you. It really moved me.
Okay. Well,
Our time's kind of up now,
okay.
but please come Thursday night, any Thursday night. We have Zen writing, and Sarah is there most Thursday nights, and it's the doing of it, I think, that's really
Yeah.
the impactful part. You know, where Sarah talked about it, finding a different part of yourself, or finding your real self or your old self, or it's kind of looking in a bunch of mirrors and then finally finding the mirror where you see yourself. Thank you so much, Sarah. This is so wonderful to hear you talk about your life.
Thank you, guys.
In observing incense, observing silence, in offering incense, observing silence, and hearing Sarah's journey, we extend compassionate care to and all those who are gravely ill, lacking basic necessities, or suffering violence in the world in thought, word, or deed. May they be serene through all their suffering, and may they, together with all beings, realize the awakened way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Now we can all stand up to do vows, do standing vows.